Take a moment and think about the parts of yourself that make you uncomfortable. Those thoughts you push away, those traits you try to hide, those aspects of your personality that you hope others never see. What if I told you that Carl Jung, one of history's greatest psychologists, discovered that these exact parts of yourself, the ones you're desperately trying to suppress, hold the key to your greatest potential? In the depths of his own psychological exploration, Jung uncovered something that most people still can't accept today. It's a truth so profound, yet so uncomfortable, that even in our modern age of self-help and personal development, we keep dancing around it, never quite looking it in the eye. And here's the fascinating part. The more you try to run from this truth, the more it chases you. I remember the exact moment this hit me. I was studying Jung's collected works, surrounded by books in my office, when I came across his patient notes. These weren't just theoretical ideas. These were real people, struggling with the same inner battles we face today. People who thought they were broken, only to discover that what they were fighting against was actually trying to make them whole. Jung spent over 60 years diving deep into the human psyche. He worked with hundreds of patients, documented thousands of dreams, and mapped out the territory of our inner world like no one before him. But what makes his discoveries so relevant today isn't just their scientific validity, it's how perfectly they explain the inner conflict we all feel in our modern lives. But before I reveal what Jung discovered about self-acceptance, we need to understand something crucial about how your mind works. Something that explains why you keep repeating the same patterns, why certain people trigger you so intensely, and why the qualities you hate most in others might be the very key to your own transformation. This is where things get interesting, because what Jung found in his research completely contradicts what most modern psychology tells you about self-improvement. In fact, it turns the entire self-help industry on its head. Think about the last time you met someone who instantly got under your skin. That person who irritated you for reasons you couldn't quite explain. Their mannerisms, their attitude, the way they carried themselves. Everything about them just felt wrong. Jung discovered something fascinating about these intense reactions we have to others, and it's not what you might expect. You see, when Jung was developing his theories, he noticed a peculiar pattern in his patients. The qualities they claimed to hate most in other people were often the very qualities they were suppressing within themselves. He called this hidden part of our personality the shadow. But it's not what you think. It's not just our dark side, our negative traits, or our worst impulses. It's something far more complex and, ironically, far more valuable. Let me share a story from Jung's own practice that illustrates this perfectly. He once worked with a highly respected religious leader who came to him complaining about the moral decay of society. This man was particularly troubled by what he saw as the excessive pleasure-seeking of young people. He spent hours condemning their behavior, their lack of discipline, their pursuit of enjoyment. But as Jung worked with him, something remarkable emerged. This religious leader had completely cut himself off from his own capacity for joy and pleasure. In his attempt to be virtuous, he had buried his natural human desires so deeply that they became like a stranger to him. A stranger he now saw and criticized everywhere he looked. The very thing he fought against in others was the thing he needed most to acknowledge in himself. But here's where Jung's insight becomes truly revolutionary. He discovered that the shadow isn't just a storage space for the parts of ourselves we reject. It's actually a source of vitality, creativity, and untapped potential. The more we push these aspects of ourselves into the shadow, the more energy we spend keeping them there, and the less alive we feel. Think about it. How much energy do you spend trying to be good enough? How often do you catch yourself judging others for the very things you fear might be true about yourself? What parts of your personality have you labeled as unacceptable and tried to lock away? This brings us to Jung's most controversial finding, the one that challenges everything we think we know about self-improvement. But before I share that, we need to understand exactly how the shadow forms in the first place, because this process begins much earlier than you might imagine. Picture yourself as a young child, full of every possible human quality: joy, anger, creativity, selfishness, love, aggression, curiosity, fear. All of these existed within you naturally, without judgment. But then something began to happen. Slowly, through interactions with parents, teachers, friends, and society, You learned which parts of yourself were acceptable and which weren't. Jung observed this process in countless patients, and what he found was remarkable. The shadow begins forming in those early moments when we first hear, "Good children don't do that," or "You shouldn't feel that way." Each time we're told to suppress a natural part of ourselves, it doesn't disappear. It simply goes underground, into what Jung called the shadow self. Here's what makes this particularly fascinating. The shadow isn't universal. What gets pushed into the shadow varies dramatically across cultures and families. In one culture, expressing anger might be completely taboo, while in another it's showing vulnerability that's unacceptable. In your family, perhaps it was being loud or taking up too much space that was discouraged. In another family, it might have been being too quiet or not assertive enough. Let me share another profound case from Jung's practice that illustrates this perfectly. He worked with a brilliant scientist who prided himself on being completely rational and logical. This man came to Jung because he was having disturbing dreams filled with wild, colorful imagery and powerful emotions. He dismissed these dreams as nonsense, as they didn't fit his logical worldview. But these dreams were his shadow demanding to be heard. All the creativity, emotion, and intuition he had buried in his pursuit of pure rationality. The scientist's story reveals something crucial about the shadow. The more completely we reject a part of ourselves, the more power it gains in our unconscious mind. Jung discovered that these rejected parts don't just sit quietly in our shadow. They actively influence our behavior, our relationships, and our choices, often in ways we don't recognize. Think of it like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. The harder you push it down, the more force it exerts trying to rise to the surface. The same thing happens with our shadow qualities. The more we try to suppress them, the more they find indirect ways to express themselves. But here's where Jung's insight becomes truly transformative. He found that the shadow isn't just a collection of negative qualities we need to overcome. Instead, and this is the part that most people still struggle to accept, the shadow often contains our most vital and powerful qualities, the very parts of ourselves that could make us whole. This brings us to the most challenging part of Jung's work, the part that explains why simple positive thinking and traditional self-improvement methods often fail to create lasting change. Because what Jung discovered about integrating the shadow goes against everything our culture tells us about personal growth. So what is the solution that Jung discovered? How do we integrate our shadow instead of fighting it? The answer lies in a profound psychological paradox that Jung called loving the enemy within. And this is where most people get stuck, because everything in our culture tells us to fight against our unwanted qualities, to overcome them through sheer willpower and positive thinking. But Jung found that true transformation happens in the exact opposite way. The parts of ourselves we judge most harshly aren't waiting to be conquered. They're waiting to be understood. Think about this for a moment. Every quality in your shadow, no matter how challenging, originally developed to help you survive, to protect you, to meet some vital need. Consider one of Jung's most compelling cases. A woman who came to him because she was too nice. She helped everyone, never said no, and was exhausted from constantly putting others first. As they worked together, they discovered that her shadow contained something she'd been taught was unacceptable: healthy selfishness. She had buried this quality so deeply that she had no boundaries, no sense of self-preservation. The transformation came not from trying to become even nicer, but from gradually accepting and integrating her capacity to say no, to put herself first sometimes, to disappoint others when necessary. What she had judged as selfish was actually the key to becoming more authentically generous, because now she could give from choice rather than compulsion. This brings us to Jung's radical method for shadow integration. Instead of trying to eliminate our unwanted qualities, he suggested we need to have a conversation with them, to ask them, what are you trying to protect me from? What wisdom do you carry? What strength lies hidden within you? It's like turning on the light in a dark room. The shadows don't disappear, they become part of the full picture. The qualities we judge most harshly often contain the very energy we need for our next stage of growth. Your too much might be exactly what someone else needs. Your not enough might be protecting a sensitivity that gives you unique insight into others' pain. Jung observed that when people began to accept and integrate their shadow qualities, something remarkable happened. The energy they had spent fighting themselves became available for creativity, growth, and authentic connection with others. They didn't become perfect. They became whole. And wholeness, Jung insisted, was far more valuable than perfection. But this leads us to the most challenging question of all. How do we actually begin this process of shadow integration in our daily lives? The practical steps Jung developed are surprisingly simple, yet profoundly effective. And they start with a practice that might seem counterintuitive at first. Here are Jung's practical steps for beginning to work with your shadow. And I need to emphasize, this isn't about dramatic revelations or intense confrontations. It's about developing a gentle curiosity toward the parts of yourself you've been avoiding. As Jung often said, the shadow is not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be explored. The first step is what Jung called shadow spotting. Pay attention to your strong emotional reactions to others, especially negative ones. That person at work who irritates you beyond reason, the friend whose behavior triggers intense judgment, these aren't random reactions. They're mirrors reflecting back parts of yourself that need attention. Let me share a powerful example from Jung's practice that illustrates this perfectly. He worked with a man who was constantly angry about people being fake and insincere in social situations. This man prided himself on being brutally honest at all times. Through their work together, he realized that his rage against fakeness was actually his shadow's way of protecting him from his own deep fear of vulnerability and his own capacity for social grace. The second step is what Jung called loving the symptom. When you notice these triggers, instead of trying to push away your reaction, become curious about it. Ask yourself, if this quality in others triggers me so strongly, what might it be trying to show me about myself? This isn't about blame or self-criticism. It's about understanding. Think of it like this. Imagine your shadow as a part of you that's been locked in a dark room for years, banging on the door to be heard. The noise might seem disruptive, even frightening, but when you finally open the door with compassion and curiosity, you often find that what seemed threatening was actually carrying a gift. The third step involves what Jung called active imagination, having an actual dialogue with these shadow aspects of yourself. This might sound strange at first, but consider how often we already have internal dialogues with ourselves. Jung simply suggested making this process conscious and intentional. Here's a practical exercise Jung gave his patients. When you notice a strong judgment about someone else, pause and write down your criticism. Then turn that same criticism toward yourself, not as an attack, but as a question. If you find yourself thinking, they're so attention-seeking, ask yourself, how have I denied my own need for attention? What would it feel like to acknowledge that need? But here's the crucial part that Jung emphasized. This work isn't about suddenly acting out all your shadow qualities. It's about acknowledgement, not indulgence. When we genuinely accept these parts of ourselves, they often transform naturally into their mature forms. The need for attention might become natural charisma. The tendency toward criticism might become discernment. This brings us to the final and most transformative step in Jung's process, one that explains why certain people seem to have a magnetic quality about them, an authenticity that draws others in naturally. It's about what happens when you finally stop fighting yourself and start integrating all these parts into a coherent whole. The final transformative step in Jung's process reveals something profound about human nature. When we stop fighting our shadow and start integrating it, we experience what Jung called individuation, becoming who we truly are. This isn't just personal growth, it's a fundamental shift in how we exist in the world. Let's return to that magnetic quality I mentioned earlier, that natural authenticity some people seem to possess. Jung discovered that this isn't something they're born with. It's something they've earned through the courage to embrace their whole selves. When we integrate our shadow, we no longer need to project our disowned parts onto others, and this changes everything about how we relate to the world. Think about the energy it takes to maintain a perfect image, to constantly hide parts of yourself, to judge others for qualities you fear in yourself. Now imagine redirecting all that energy toward creative expression, genuine relationships, and meaningful work. This is what Jung saw happen with patients who completed this integration process. One of Jung's most remarkable cases involved a successful businessman who appeared to have everything together on the surface. He came to Jung because despite his success, he felt empty and disconnected. Through their work together, he discovered that in becoming the perfect businessman, he had completely severed himself from his artistic, playful nature, qualities he now harshly judged in others, especially his own children. As he began to integrate these rejected parts of himself, something extraordinary happened. Not only did his relationship with his children transform, but his business approach changed too. He found that the creativity he had suppressed actually made him a better leader, and the playfulness he had judged brought innovation to his work. He didn't become less professional, he became more whole. This is the ultimate paradox Jung discovered. What we resist not only persists, but holds the key to our unique gift to the world. The very qualities we judge most harshly in ourselves might be the source of our greatest contribution. Your sensitivity might be your pathway to empathy. Your intensity might fuel your passion. Your doubt might be the source of your wisdom. As Jung famously said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. This work of shadow integration isn't just about personal healing. It's about becoming who you were meant to be before the world told you who you should be. You might be wondering now, is it too late for me? Have I pushed these parts of myself away for too long? Jung's answer would be clear. It's never too late to begin this journey of self-acceptance. Every step toward embracing your whole self, no matter how small, creates ripples of transformation in your life and in the lives of those around you. Remember, the goal isn't to become perfect, it's to become real. And in a world that often feels increasingly artificial, your authenticity might be the greatest gift you can offer. The parts of yourself you've been hiding might be exactly what someone else needs to see to begin their own journey of self-acceptance. The journey Jung mapped out for us isn't easy, but its rewards are profound. When we begin to integrate our shadow, we discover that what we thought were our weaknesses often contain our greatest strengths. The parts of ourselves we tried to hide become the very qualities that make us unique and valuable to others. Think back to where we started, those uncomfortable parts of yourself you try to push away. Now you understand that they're not your enemies. They're lost parts of yourself waiting to be reclaimed. Every judgment you make, every strong reaction you have, is an invitation to know yourself more deeply. Jung's legacy offers us something far more valuable than the promise of perfection. He shows us the path to wholeness, to becoming fully human with all our complexities and contradictions. In a world that often demands we choose between our light and shadow, Jung reminds us that true growth comes from embracing both. As you leave this video, I invite you to try something. The next time you feel that surge of judgment towards someone else, pause. Take a breath. Ask yourself, what part of me am I meeting in this moment? Not to condemn yourself, but to understand. Because understanding is the first step toward integration, and integration is the path to becoming who you truly are. This work of shadow integration isn't a destination. It's a lifelong journey of self-discovery. Each step you take toward accepting your whole self creates more space for others to do the same. In a world that often feels fragmented and divided, this might be the most important work we can do. Remember what Jung discovered through his decades of research and practice. The parts of yourself you judge most harshly might contain exactly what you need for your next stage of growth. Your too much might be someone else's inspiration. Your not enough might be the doorway to your deepest wisdom. The choice now lies before you. Will you continue trying to be who you think you should be? Or will you begin the journey of becoming who you truly are? As Jung would say, everything depends on this decision. Not just your personal growth, but your ability to contribute your unique gifts to a world that desperately needs them. Thank you for joining me on this exploration of Jung's profound insights. If you found value in these ideas, please consider subscribing for more deep dives into psychological wisdom that can transform your life. And remember, the parts of yourself you've been hiding might be exactly what someone else needs to see to begin their own journey of self-acceptance. Until next time, may you find the courage to embrace all parts of yourself, and in doing so, discover the gift of becoming wholly, authentically you.